en el centro del periodismo.
We have, I'm sorry. Okay, just to my left here is Dr. Julian Paredes, who's a professor of Spanish and director of Latin American and Iberian Studies here at Texas Tech. He earned his PhD from New York University and is the author of more than 60 journal articles or chapters in books, which are published or either or currently in press. And some of the courses he teaches here include Latin American literatures, with emphasis on the Southern Cone, modernism in the Spanish-speaking world, contemporary Mexican narrative, Hispanic detective fiction, intriguing, post-war peninsular narrative, and Hispanic children's literature.
Yeah, that's
Next to him is Dr. Ken Wilkinson. Dr. Wilkinson is the director for the Institute for Hispanic and International Communication here in the college. In 2013, he also became the editor of the Journal of Spanish Language Media, which is hosted here at IHIC here in the college. His international experience includes teaching English in Cusco, Peru for 6 months, full-time teaching at the Tecnológico de Monterrey in Monterrey, Mexico, and several invited teaching gigs in Mexico, Spain, France, and England. Dr. Wilkinson earned his PhD from the University of Texas, Austin, for which we always give him some forgiveness. And in radio, television, and film with a concentration in international communication, and is also a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, as well as University of Colorado, Boulder. Okay, next to him, Dr. John Busterian, Associate Professor of Spanish and Director of the Comparative Literature Program here at Tech. His PhD is from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is faculty for the Certificate in Medieval and Renaissance Studies in addition to directing the Comp Lit program. And his research focuses on early Spanish literature and culture, race and ethnic studies, critical theory, Spanish Southwest, and Dr. Busterian is currently completing a book on how to read Miguel de Cervantes in the 21st century, and is researching a book on the history of animals in the Spanish-speaking Southwestern Peninsula. Okay, and finally, next to Dr. Busterian there on the end, Claudia Simon, was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil. She's lived in many countries, including Colombia and Venezuela, where she learned to speak Spanish, and from there developed a passion for Spanish literature. She joined Texas Tech as a PhD student of Spanish and a Portuguese instructor in 2010. Her interests include Golden Age and medieval literature, Portuguese, and art history. She's currently working on a dissertation proposal that will focus on the use of playing cards in the Spaniard picaresque novel. Very interesting group of folks here tonight. So generally, we give each of you 5-10 minutes or so to offer your comments. And you might care to volunteer to go first?
We may need to draw straws.
So who will go first?
Well, if we go alphabetically, it'll be Dr. Busterian.
Does you want to go first?
I can.
If you want, start off saying some things about the cultural context.
I can start out by saying some specific things regarding Brazil, especially the religious aspects that we see in the movie, and this idea of cyclical time that is a repetition. Basically, at the beginning of the movie, we see kind of like a witch, which is basically a curandeira, as we called, or mãe de santo. As some of you probably know, Brazil has a huge influence of African religions coming into Brazil, and where it happens syncretism of religions. So where you see is basically somebody doing some type of religious ritual where you send the dead person to kind of another space, and then you have this sensation of reincarnation that is the little girl. And that type of religions is very traditional as a symbolic ritual, that you have a small shell called búzio, and that shell represents your orisha, like where it's kind of that religious deity that is with you all your life as you grow. And I think that was one symbolic aspect, because you see that on the moment of her death, that's where she takes it out. So in a way, now the Orisha is leaving her body. In terms of the geography of the place, I know the film was shot in what we call the Sudoeste of Brazil. Brazil has 5, main regions. The Sudoeste region is based in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais e Espírito Santo. And but going back, I don't really think that the space itself has much importance. I think it has that dreamlike quality. So besides the fact that the movie has that title, I haven't really been able to connect a lot the title with the geographical space. I don't think it's something really relevant to this. I think that space of a dreamlike is more relevant. And for somebody who speaks Portuguese, at the beginning it was completely irritating to the fact that they would speak and you would just hear, like, you would not have a follow-up. And I think throughout the movie, that's what I felt. I felt the director was trying us to feel also that quality of time, especially at the end when you close your eyes and you hear the rain. I think that idea of time, it was meant for us to feel that irritation as well. Like, is there a problem with the sound? Is the sound not sinking in? You have this moment where you're kind of thinking what's going on. And that's about it for now. We can open there.
Yeah, originally when I saw the title for the film, I was interested in, is this going to deal with a specific place? I'm interested in the southwest of the U.S., which I like kind of disrupting and thinking of it as La Frontera Norteña, or the northern place where we are right now. And so I thought, is this going to be about southwest? About geography, I mean, the only thing the kind of one thing that was setting was this economic system, which was the salt, which is something that's done here and in other parts of the world. And since the Romans, they did it the same way, where when the tide comes out, you collect the salt, which seemed to me this one sort of economic activity that hasn't changed during time. What to say about the film? Briefly, I would think one conclusion I was thinking about what you were saying about The Witch, is I saw this as a film in which the director shows how a filmmaker can be like a witch. And I saw this as very much of a film for filmmakers or people interested in how we see, in what mediates our vision, which I think concerns all of us, because we're all thinking about our screen and we're not wanting to look at the film screen anyways, because we want to pull out our little screens and look at that. So this is like from the very beginning, putting something between our vision and the action. So the first scene we have are these kind of high grass or reeds, and we see through them something's mediating that. Then we have the fan, and then of course this then comes up again in this whole circular thing. And so, there's this kind of constant, very slow, sometimes almost too much, in my opinion. I'm not a film critic, but I would say it's almost overly wrought in parts. But I did like the way in which this film always made you think about how you see things and what's mediating that. And so these two ideas of like the grass, it comes up again at the end when she comes back. Now it's not the witch, it's this young woman, and then we see the fan again, and we're looking through that, and it's probably bothering a lot of us who like to see our films unmediated, where we don't have to think and where our emotions are just controlled by the film. I don't think this film lets you do that, so I like that about it.
Yeah, I could follow up on that. I think it really makes us as viewers in another part of the world think about mediation, think about how we understand people's lives, people's relations, because it's really out of sync, I think, to a lot of Western minds. There are ways to make connections that we're familiar with, but for me, the notion of mediation that's presented here, I totally agree with your point there, but it's presented to us through a very Latin American lens, and I also agree with the previous comment about syncretism. That's one of the notes that I wrote down here. I mean, particularly with that sequence with the band, you know, moving around. I mean, that's it. That is sort of, you know, traditional religion, pre-Columbian religion, syncretized with Catholicism, and also I think with what, you know, the slave trade brought as well, which is one of the things that's really interesting about Brazil in comparison with some other areas of Latin America. I'd actually like to hear from the students after, you know, we give our little elements here of sort of what you found familiar and what you found different or alien or outside of your experience, because I think there's a combination of those. A few of the images that I thought were particularly important, windows and doorways, very important, and I think it goes back to this sort of moving back and forth in time, but also in space and different periods of not only an individual's life, but a community's life. I mean, there's this sense of impending doom when he's talking about the salt's gone, the fish is gone, the people are leaving, which is very much tied in with sort of the demographics of contemporary Brazil and people moving. I mean, we're used to, we know about that in West Texas, but I think in some areas of Latin America, including Brazil, it's a major issue. People moving off the land into these urban areas that are getting increasingly difficult to sustain. Also, I sort of imagined the filmmaker and others involved in the project being more interested in people's hands than their faces when they were going, you know, trying to cast the film. I thought hands were very important. They were telling so much of the story, whether it was the images of these very sort of muscular, sinewy hands of women who are having to spend so much of their time, you know, working. Also the image of the rosary sort of moving through the fingers, and then at the very end also the shell falling from the hand. I think that was what was moving the story both forward and backward in a lot of ways.
Babies too. That image of the baby, the uncontrolled hands and feet.
Yeah. Yeah, and one other point I want to make, and maybe you could speak to this more, it seemed like the verb voltar, return, was used over and over. I'll come back, I'll be back, or come back. And it seems to me that also fits with sort of the narrative structure of there's this coming and going and returning and moving away and coming back. And of course the image of, I guess it's the inn at the beginning and then the end, and there's this sort of sense of what's going on there.
And to add to that also, one thing they did not translate was the music of the procession. They were singing this music, and they did not translate the lyrics. But from what I recall, there was this sense of voltar and we are going, and so yes, definitely I think there is a thematical thing, and even to the fact that she comes back to the same bed where she was born, and again that idea of always, you know, cyclical time.
Well, I would like to tell the students a little bit how I see the movie. What I think that the director tried to do, to think if also we can help a little bit the students with their debate, or to ask questions. And I see the movie as an attempt, you know, from the director to tell a mythical story, a story that will not happen in time as we see time in our own experience, it's a different time, you know, because in our life we think time is linear and even progressive. In mythical time is cyclical, it goes around, right? So this is a mythical story told in a cyclical time. And also mythical stories are stories about birth and death and rebirth, you know, so you have to think how the story begins with the birth, you know, from a dead mother, right? And then you have the life of the one woman, the child that is born, you know, apparently in a short period of time. So that is the story that the director is trying to tell for me, you know, in the story. Now, certainly, if you look at the space is not realistic either. You cannot say, you know, the space in the southwest of Brazil is very different. Also, the psychology of Brazilians is, they are very talkative, you know, very communicative, something that you don't see in the movie at all. You know, it's very slow, the characters almost do not talk, and obviously the director is concentrated in the gestures and not in what the characters say. Now, if we look at the movie in terms of the history of Brazilian cinema, the movie fits well into what was the history of Brazilian cinema mainly in the 60s, what they call the cinema novo, which was, you know, usually the cinema novo focused on a very different region in Brazil, which was the Northeast. And I don't know why they call this movie the Southwest, because it doesn't look the Southwest at all. You know? But it looks a little bit, the photography and the dynamics, what Glauber Rocha, for example, tried to do in his movies in the 60s. You know? So I think the director is trying to go back to what is, you know, the cinema language of Brazilian language in the 60s. You know, very slow, cyclical stories, mythical stories about allegorical characters mainly, you know. So I think that is what he's trying to do. I think there is certain novelty in the way certainly he treats the, you know, the story, also the characters. You know, they do not have what we would call the realistic psychology. So this is a story that happens in its own time. It doesn't happen in history, it happens in a mythical time with characters that are very different from Brazilians or from ourselves. You know. Now, what did the director is telling this story? Is this a poetical story? What is he trying to tell us? What is he trying to do with his cinema? That is a little bit for me a question mark. I am not sure if I follow him completely or if I agree with his project as a movie. I think he's a fairly young movie director and it's his first movie. But I think a little bit that's what I see in the movie, and it will be interesting to kind of pass on the ideas and see what are actually the you know, the question marks that the movie opened for our students, or for yours.
I guess it's a good time to open up for questions, comments from the audience.
Obligatory, I always have to ask questions. The word that comes to mind here is, and I know that Marquez is from Colombia, not here, but I mean magical realism, and I mean it has this sort of realism aspect to it, but it's magic. I mean, it also has this sort of unrealistic notion of time. I was thinking about the cyclical images that with the fan in the end, but also they get on the
Wheel.
it's not a merry-go, the wheel, you know, and they go around.
Yeah.
And the young man sort of gets a glimpse, the boy gets a glimpse of, he realizes during that, I think, that the woman opposite him is the girl he met earlier in the day, and it's concerning to me. But I was curious about whether you would see this as a specimen of magical realism or not.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd like to talk about is the use of widescreen in terms of composition. I think that this is a film that you do see widescreen films, but I've never really seen a movie in widescreen that was more sensitive to compositional elements. I mean, he really makes use of the widescreen, and he also has really interesting dissolves. There was one dissolve from the dog on the lake that, you know, this to the beach with the small shells on it, which of course are meaningful. That was very interesting. And another dissolve where I guess it's panning along the wall, replacing one of the figures, and it's a long dissolve. Well done, really interesting. So.
I don't see it as related with magical realism, because magic realism from Garcia Marquez, it happened, you know, within the Hispanic literary tradition, and Brazilian, Portugal and Brazil has their own type of literary tradition, which is different, and I think they do not work with with this combination of realism and magic as they did in the Hispanic world in the 60s. Now, in the case of Brazil, as you said, the movie is extremely formalistic. It works the form and the image and the black and white and the shape and the details extremely. Which was something it was done in the 60s, because it wasn't in the 60s there was a movement of neo-avant-garde, neo-modernist literary language, and as well as cinematic language. And this is in a way, a kind of neo-modernistic movie. I would say neo because modernism as a movement began 100 years ago. But it seems that it's present, and in a way we are always going back to it, And so it's a very formalistic type of movie, but it very much is within the literary Brazilian tradition, If we, for example, look at some of the movies done with by Glover Rocha, like Deus e o Diablo a Terra del Sol, which were o Antonio das Mortes. Those movies were extremely slow, very formalistic, and they told totally unrealistic stories, putting characters in a kind of allegorical way, conceptual way. And so I think in a way he's trying to create a context, a contextual history of Brazilian movie with its own history, in the 60s, etc. So this is a director who is extremely, conscious of the history of the movies, conscious of the aesthetic qualities of photography, For me, trying to make a mark as this is director who is directing his first movie. trying to make a mark for himself, like saying, here, I come with something new, and at the same time showing that he knows a lot about movies and movie history. Now, whether the story he's telling is proper or it's excessive, I think it's something that probably we can answer, the student can answer. Is this the story that you expect from a new director, let's say, to tell you? Because in a way, our society is not very different from Brazil. He's looking at a kind of Brazil that seems to be very, very exotic. But we could look at, in the same way, we could look at the Southwest here, or we could look at, for example, the area of the Mississippi. He's creating certainly a mythical landscape. So it happens, a mythical landscape happens nowhere. You just have to make it look a place that is familiar and unfamiliar. The Southwest he shows is totally unfamiliar. No person from the Southwest will recognize it. And so I would say, is this an effective way? Did the story touch us? In my own case, it did touch me, but I would say it touched me because if I look at the story itself, the story of the woman, what happened to the woman, what happened to the child, to the girl, the way she relates with others. Then when she has sex with this other mythical character that is coming out of the procession, that apparently is the same man who was in the house because he had all the suit. All this story, the relation with the other child, the relation with the witch woman who dies, fire, she dies, etc. The relationship with water, and eventually how it ends the movie, because it ends where it began, and the woman is very old, So the whole process of life finished. You have the candle, and then these final images, which I thought, I don't know why the director added the final images where she goes back to playing with the child when she's a teenager. So my question is, for me the story had a lot of content. It was rich, interesting, and I follow it, and it touched me. Now, did it touch also you? Because I'm somebody who had been, I had seen thousands of films in my life, so I am a very cinematic person. Even when I don't teach film, I teach literature. But I would like to know, those of you who are young and who are studying now, who have a different sensibility than I do, how do you see this story? Did it touch you? Did you follow it? Or it's totally strange and in a way frustrating, or the language that the director created is just weird, or it has a future? How do you see it? Any volunteer? Can I point out somebody? Yes.
Kind of took about halfway through the movie to kind of feel this way or be emotionally invested.
Can you talk a little louder, please?
It took about halfway through the film for me to feel an emotional connection to her story, but it really bothered me how everybody was interested in her as a young person, and they were interested in bringing her into the family fold or into their story. But as she grows older and she drifts off onto her own, and the silence that the mother talks about, it just seems like she only ages when she's on her own. People seem less interested. She dies alone on a lonely voyage to that.
Did you follow the story well, or you were disconnected by the story?
I followed it, but I just felt like that really bothered me, that they were interested for a bit and then they weren't any longer, as far as like the relationships between people.
Did you see it as an organic story, or you got lost in some part of the story?
I didn't get lost.
No.
I just didn't like it. It bothered me.
Okay. You didn't like it. What about somebody else? Did you find it weird?
I know for about the first 20 minutes in the movie, I found it extremely unsettling. I kept waiting for it to turn into some sort of a horror movie. And I don't know if that's it's just the music and the sound effects and the silence and it was really unsettling. I didn't mind it. It was just didn't seem that personally that I thought it was going to be. And then I know I followed it fine all the way through, but I kept waiting for, if they're doing this mythical story about life cycles and all that, I wanted them to make that connection stronger. I wanted to know what happened to her baby. I was expecting she would have the baby and die.
Exactly, that's a
Her
big
mother
mystery.
did.
What happened to the baby? Where is the baby?
Yeah, so I wanted them to make it more mythical, make it farther that way. So I was disappointed at the end, just because I thought they could have had a stronger ending. But I don't know if that's just my American-ness showing through
No,
what I'm expecting, but...
Is this a story very strange to you? Is it the first time you see a movie this unrealistic, or you saw other movies before within the same, let's say, cinematic language? Is the language totally strange to you, or not so much? Or you saw other movies like this? Yes.
Well, I've seen quite a bit of foreign films growing up overseas. This one I found frustrating with the lack of language. I've seen many silent films, but I think they still portrayed what this director did in his film. I think he left a lot of holes in areas where he could have used a little bit more language to convey the feelings. Maybe the voice that is being used could have been more clear to help get the point across a little bit better.
Now, did you like the movie? You think it was a good movie, or you didn't? What do you think? Yeah.
I think the person one that speaks Portuguese, it was really irritating.
You speak
towards,
Portuguese?
the first half.
Do you speak Portuguese?
Yeah, I'm from Brazil, and
Okay.
it was just weird. I didn't know what was going on. If it was broken, I don't know.
Was that the director's intent then? I mean, that was supposed to be off like that? Okay, okay. I wasn't sure if there was the problem with the film.
I don't know how it would have gotten.
That's what I thought was going on.
Yeah, because it did get on track about halfway
Towards the
through.
end.
And then
In
it
terms
got-
of, because
But I
Let's
know,
report-
like, what I noticed is that at the beginning, the person, we will hear the person talking, and then we will hear the mouth. But then it matched, it got synced. But then after the end, it was the opposite of what happened at the beginning. It was faster, you hear faster. And I think, again, there was the sensation of time. I think the movie was meant to irritate you in a way. I think the movie was meant to create, especially I was sitting and at one point I started counting, there was about 15 people on their phones. And I think it's because of that, is that sensation that we find, the timing that we can multitask, meanwhile, because you're still following everything that is going on. But for us who are so exposed to the idea of clips and, currently so much things are throwing at us, the movie really puts you in a place where you have time to think. And I think that the idea with the language was exactly that, because you spend just 20 minutes thinking, how come they send a movie that is not syncing? And then you start realizing, well, maybe it's not that, and you go through that process of thinking, what is really going on here? So I think the movie was meant to do that, to kind of, and another thing that I don't know if you guys are aware, it took him 10 years to do the movie. And I saw an interview recently, and he was asked, why did it take you so long? Was because of the lack of money? Did the project? I said, no, it just take too long. And that was it.
Yeah. Well, it's a very artistic movie, so for an artist, you know, to create a piece of art can take a long time.
Yes. Because every frame can be a photograph.
Well, that was actually overwhelming for me. About partway through, trying to make meaning out of all these textures and shapes and, you know, the position of subjects in the frame. After a while, it was just kind of overload.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of the rest of you experienced that. At first, I was really, you know, excited about what I was seeing, and after a while, it was just a little too overwhelming visually, which seems like a strange thing to say because it was so slow moving. It is in black and white. The context, the environment that's being shot is very primitive. I mean, I hope that that's part of what, you know, you got out of the message, and particularly with the title of the film, right? The most developed area of Brazil, but then we're seeing this very sort of primitive existence. And that was one of the things I was trying to, you know, think about what some of the students might have been confronting in seeing the film as sort of levels of development. And it made me think about, you know, what is development, because there's a intense, deep human experience being portrayed, but a lot of people are probably reading it like, you know, this is the Dark Ages practically, in terms of, you know, light bulbs hanging from cords, horse-drawn carriages. Some of the typical images that we associate with underdevelopment are right there, but the complexity of the story is saying something quite different about the people's existence.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, definitely.
You said that you are from Brazil. From what area?
I was born in São Paulo, but I lived most of my life in Recife.
Where?
Recife.
Recife, which is the north. Yes. And did you see any other movie like this in Brazil, or did you find this movie very Brazilian or very un-Brazilian?
I don't know. Not really, to be very honest. I mean, the whole religious thing that they did in the middle of the street, like the song, I recognized it, I learned it when I was younger, but I didn't really make any strong connections.
Any more comments? I am sure many of you must, because I see at the faces of many of the students surprised faces, serious, concerned, worried. I'm sure that you are thinking. Any volunteer to say a little bit what is in your mind right now? Yes.
What really stood out to me, and it kind of makes sense now that you said that he took 10 years making the film, is that everything that the people in the film did was so slow. Like the time lapse of the whole life happened through the movie, and that was fast. But like walking was slow, when she was pouring the water was slow, and then she poured more water really slowly. When they drank the water, it was slow, and it kind of just made you think like how you said we could look down on our phones and look like up and should still be like walking. But to me, that kind of clashes against like our American lifestyle. Everything here is like fast paced. We do everything fast. So that's what really stood out to me because I've never seen a really good film where everything that they do is so slow.
The movie has also no social message. You know, if there is a message, I imagine must be religious or ritualistic, but socially, you know, it's not referred to contemporary society or to social conflicts within society. And,
well, there might be some social messages to take the other side. Could there be, and this is more of a question, I don't know if you saw this, I was thinking in this cyclical thing, it wasn't just kind of we were born and we die. I also saw this father violence to die. I saw incest. I don't know if you saw this because the clown was the mask. And
yeah,
there
is.
I mean, I don't. I mean, that's sort of.
But incest within, you know, a mythical society has a very different, meaning than in our social realistic world. It's a very different, within a ritualistic society, or within a mythical society, or in a religious story, incest has a totally different meaning. In the sense that, the kind of problem that, let's say, sexual violence, etc., may have in our society when we look, in a realistic way, in social terms. This is a kind of parallel story. It doesn't happen in the real world, let's say.
My response to that would be also, one might need this sort of story or this way of telling it because it is such a powerfully traumatic event, and so this is the sort of result of that violence too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. What do you think, for example, people, of the way the child was born? The woman was dead, and they cut open her belly with a knife, and that's supposed to be the way the child was born. The mother was dead. I don't know if that scientifically is possible. I guess it's probably possible.